Emma Shaw clutched the rough fabric of her prison uniform, fingers trembling as she squeezed through the narrow maintenance shaft. At 17, she was slight enough to fit through spaces most inmates couldn't dream of navigating. The persistent drip of water from rusted pipes echoed around her, masking the sound of her labored breathing. 3 years into her 5-year sentence at Willowbrook Juvenile Detention Center, she had finally found her way out. The plan had formed slowly over months of careful observation. Emma had noticed the maintenance worker who came every Thursday to check the facility's aging heating system. She'd watched his routines, memorized the timing of his visits, and most importantly, noted how he never fully secured the access panel near the laundry room. Tonight, that negligence would be her salvation. Just a little further, she whispered to herself, ignoring the sharp metal edges that scraped against her elbows and knees as she inched forward. Each movement sent jolts of pain through her body, but freedom was worth the temporary discomfort. Emma wasn't supposed to be in Willowbrook at all. At 14, she had been an honor student with dreams of becoming a doctor, but one night changed everything when she got into a car with her boyfriend Tyler, not knowing he had stolen it for a joyride. The high-speed chase that followed ended with a crashed vehicle and a police officer with critical injuries. Tyler died on impact. Emma, the survivor, received the full weight of the justice system's retribution. She had always maintained that she didn't know the car was stolen, but her attorney was overworked and underpaid. The prosecutor painted her as a delinquent teen with a history of minor infractions, skipping school, petty shoplifting, magnifying them into evidence of a criminal personality. The judge, facing re-election and eager to appear tough on crime, sentenced her harshly to send a message. 3 years of her youth spent in concrete and steel, 3 years of missed family dinners, high school dances, and normal teenage experiences. Her mother visited when she could afford the bus fare, which wasn't often. Her father had disappeared long before her incarceration. Inside Willowbrook, Emma had found no rehabilitation, only survival. The shaft widened slightly, and Emma moved faster. According to her mental map, she was approaching the exterior wall. The maintenance tunnels connected to an outbuilding that housed the facility's generators. If her timing was right, the night guard would be on his break, leaving her a 4-minute window to cross the yard to the perimeter fence. A distant alarm suddenly blared through the facility. Emma froze, heart pounding against her ribcage. Had they discovered her missing already? She'd stuffed her bed with pillows in the classic prison escape tradition, but she hadn't expected a bed check until morning. Something else must have triggered the alarm. Either way, she needed to move faster. The end of the shaft appeared ahead, a metal grate illuminated by faint moonlight filtering through from outside. Emma pushed against it with her palms, but it didn't budge. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as she pressed harder, throwing her small frame against the unyielding metal. After a third attempt, she felt it give slightly. One more powerful thrust, and the grate fell away with a clatter that seemed deafening in the night silence. Emma emerged into the cool air of freedom, her prison-pale skin prickling with goosebumps in the autumn chill. The generator building stood dark and silent, exactly as she had hoped. But the alarm still wailed in the distance, and now searchlights swept across the main yard of the facility. She had minutes, perhaps seconds, before they expanded their search. She sprinted across the gravel toward the perimeter fence, staying low and using the shadows for cover. The fence loomed 15 feet high, topped with razor wire that glinted menacingly in the moonlight. But Emma had prepared for this too. For months, she had secretly gathered materials from the facility workshop, heavy-duty gloves fashioned from leather scraps and a thin blanket stolen from the infirmary during a feigned illness. Throwing the blanket over the razor wire at the top of the fence, Emma began to climb, ignoring the burning in her muscles and the way the chain links cut into her fingers even through the makeshift gloves. Below, she heard shouting. A spotlight swept dangerously close, and she pressed herself against the fence, willing her dark uniform to blend with the shadows. When the light passed, she continued upward, reaching the top and carefully maneuvering. Over the blanket-covered razor wire, one slip would mean severe lacerations or worse. As she began her descent on the outside of the fence, the spotlight found her. "Prisoner on the fence, section east." A male voice boomed through a megaphone. Emma let go, falling the remaining distance and landing hard on her ankle. Pain shot up her leg, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She limped into the dense woods that surrounded the facility, the sounds of pursuit growing behind her. Dogs barked. In the distance, they were bringing out the K9 units. She had anticipated this. Earlier that day, she had rubbed her clothes with pungent kitchen spices, smuggled from the cafeteria, hoping to confuse the dog's sense of smell. It wasn't perfect, but it might buy her time. For hours, Emma pushed through the forest, guided only by the stars visible through breaks in the canopy. She crossed a shallow stream, wading upstream for several hundred yards to further throw off the dogs. By dawn, the sounds of pursuit had faded, but she knew they wouldn't give up easily. Emma needed shelter, food, and most importantly, to get out of her prison uniform. As the first light of day filtered through the trees, she spotted smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. A town, small enough to be unfamiliar with her case, she hoped, but large enough to get lost in. It was her best option. On the outskirts of town, Emma found a clothesline behind a modest home. Guilt gnawed at her as she stole a pair of jeans, a hoodie, and a baseball cap, but necessity overrode her conscience. She changed quickly behind a garden shed, bundling her prison uniform under a pile of yard waste. The clothes were too large, but they would serve their purpose. The town was called Millfield, according to the welcome sign. Emma walked with her head down, cap pulled low over her eyes, trying to project normalcy despite her exhaustion and fear. She needed money and a more permanent place to hide. As she wandered the unfamiliar streets, her gaze fell upon the tall spire of a church rising above the modest buildings of the town centre. She had never been particularly religious, but something about the old stone structure called to her. Perhaps it was simply that churches were traditional sanctuaries, or maybe it was the memory of her grandmother speaking of forgiveness and second chances during their Sunday visits before her passing. Whatever the reason, Emma found herself drawn toward St. Michael's Episcopal Church as though guided by an invisible hand. Father Thomas Riley was arranging hymnals in the pews when he heard the church's heavy oak door creak open. Morning light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the worn stone floor. The church was usually empty at this hour. His parishioners tended to visit for Sunday service or evening prayer, not on a Wednesday at 7 a.m. "Hello," he called, straightening up from his task. "Welcome to St. Michael's." A thin figure stood hesitantly in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun. As his eyes adjusted, Father Thomas could make out a young person in oversized clothes, shoulders hunched defensively. A girl, he thought, though her features were partially obscured by a baseball cap. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice as he noted her limping gait and the dirt smudged across her face. Emma hadn't planned what to say. She had imagined the church empty, a place to rest briefly before moving on. The presence of the priest complicated matters, but exhaustion and hunger were taking their toll, and her injured ankle throbbed painfully with each step. I need help," she managed, voice cracking from disuse and dehydration. Father Thomas approached slowly, maintaining a respectful distance. At 58, with grey hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he projected an aura of calm that had served him well through 30 years of ministry. He'd seen people in crisis before, domestic violence victims, runaways, the homeless during harsh winters. This girl, whoever she was clearly in trouble. "Why don't you sit down?" he suggested, gesturing to a pew. "I was about to make..." Some tea in the rectory. Would you like some? Perhaps something to eat as well. Emma hesitated, years of institutional distrust warring with her body's urgent needs. Eventually hunger won out, and she nodded silently. The rectory adjoined the church through a connecting door near the altar. It was a modest space, a small office, a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a bedroom where the priest could rest between services or during bad weather. Father Thomas busied himself with the kettle, tactfully giving Emma space while keeping her in his peripheral vision. "I'm Father Thomas," he said conversationally as he set out mugs and a plate of store-bought cookies. "This church has been here since 1892. The stone came from a local quarry that's long since closed." Emma remained silent, but accepted the tea and cookies with trembling hands when they were offered. She ate ravenously, confirming the priest's suspicion that she hadn't eaten in some time. "You're safe here," he said gently after she had consumed 3 cookies and half the mug of tea. "Whatever trouble you're in, perhaps I can help." Emma's eyes darted to the door, calculating her escape route. "You can't help me. No one can." "That's rarely true," Father Thomas replied. "In my experience, most problems have solutions, though they may not be the ones we initially hope for." A sudden noise outside, a car door slamming, caused Emma to startle violently, spilling tea across the table. Father Thomas quickly handed her a napkin, noticing the raw abrasions on her hands and the prison-issue slip-on shoes. She still. A war, incongruous with her stolen clothes. "You're running from something," he observed quietly. It wasn't a question. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't cried in Willowbrook. Crying was seen as weakness there, but the priest's gentle tone broke something inside her. "They'll send me back," she whispered. "I can't go back there, I can't." Father Thomas processed this information carefully. He had worked as a prison chaplain early in his career and recognized the institutional pallor of her skin, the defensive posture, the hypervigilance. "Are you in danger where you came from?" he asked directly. Emma thought of Willowbrook, the arbitrary punishments, the solitary confinement for minor infractions, the guard who lingered too long watching the girls shower. She thought of her cellmate who had attempted suicide twice. "Not the kind of danger you mean," she answered honestly, "but it was killing me slowly." Father Thomas nodded. "Would you like to tell me your name?" After a long pause, she replied, "Emma." "Emma," he repeated. "That's a lovely name. It means whole or universal in its origins." A police siren wailed in the distance, and Emma's body tensed again. "Father." Thomas noticed but continued speaking calmly. "Emma, I don't know your situation fully, but I believe in both justice and mercy. Sometimes our systems provide one without the other. If you'd like to stay here while we figure things out, you're welcome to. The church has a small room above the sanctuary. It was once used by traveling priests. It's simple, but private." Emma stared at him incredulously. "You'd let me stay? You don't even know me. I could be dangerous." Father Thomas smiled slightly. "Are you dangerous, Emma?" "No," she whispered. "I'm just lost." "Then perhaps this is where you're meant to be found," he replied. "The church has always been a sanctuary for those in need." He showed her to the small room accessible by a narrow staircase behind the choir loft. It contained a single bed, a nightstand with a lamp, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the church's garden. The space was dusty from disuse, but clean. "Rest," Father Thomas advised. "We can talk more when you're ready." Left alone, Emma collapsed onto the bed, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. As sleep claimed her, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake in trusting this stranger, or if perhaps she had found the one person who might understand. She awoke hours later to the sound of voices below. Creeping to the door, she listened intently, fear sending adrenaline coursing through her veins once more. "Checking all the buildings in town," a male voice was saying. The fugitive is considered. Non-violent, but escaped inmates can be unpredictable. Of course, officer, came Father Thomas's steady reply. I haven't seen anyone unusual, but I'll certainly keep an eye out and call immediately if I do. Emma's heart pounded so loudly, she was certain they must hear it echoing through the church. But moments later, she heard footsteps retreating and the heavy church door closing. When Father Thomas climbed the stairs to check on her, he found her frantically gathering her few possessions. "You need to leave," Emma whispered urgently. "I heard them. They're looking for me. If they find me here, you'll be charged with harboring a fugitive." "They've gone," Father Thomas assured her. "And yes, they're searching for an escaped juvenile offender. They showed me your picture." Emma froze. "You know who I am. I know you're Emma Shaw, age 17, escaped from Willowbrook Detention Center last night. What I don't know is your story. Would you like to tell me? Trapped and with nowhere else." To turn, Emma slowly sank back onto the bed and began to speak. She told him everything: the stolen car, Tyler's death, the injured officer, the harsh sentence. She told him about the conditions at Willowbrook, the lack of educational opportunities, the casual cruelty. And finally, she told him about her escape. Father Thomas listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he remained silent for several moments. "What will you do?" Emma finally asked. "Call them?" "No," he said firmly. "Not yet, at least. I believe your story, Emma, and while I don't condone breaking the law, I understand why you felt you had no other option." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden below. "I believe in redemption above all else. Sometimes our path to it isn't straight or easy or even legal, but I do think we need to find a better solution than you living as a fugitive." "There isn't one," Emma insisted. "Once they catch me, I'll serve my original sentence, plus extra time for escaping. I'll be 24 before I get out. My life will be over." "Your life is never over while you still breathe, Father," Thomas corrected gently. "But I understand your fear. Let me think on this. In the meantime, you'll stay here where you're safe." That night, Emma slept fitfully, dreams filled with barking dogs and searchlights. In the morning, Father Thomas brought her breakfast and fresh clothes, modest items donated to the church for those in need. "I've made some calls," he told her as she ate. "I have a friend, a retired judge named Margaret, who now works with an innocence project. She's willing to review your case without revealing your whereabouts for now." Hope fluttered in Emma's chest, but she quashed it quickly. Hope was dangerous. It led to disappointment. "What good will that do?" she asked. "The facts of my case won't change." "Perhaps not," Father Thomas agreed. "But interpretations can change. Sentences can be reconsidered, especially for juveniles. There are options we can explore: appeals, requests for clemency, alternative sentencing programs. For the first time since her arrest, Emma allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she wasn't defined by her worst mistake, where redemption was possible. Days passed, stretching into weeks. Emma remained hidden in the church, venturing downstairs only after hours when the building was empty. Father Thomas brought her books, and she devoured them hungrily, making up for the educational opportunities denied to her at Willowbrook. They discussed literature, philosophy, and theology, engaging in debates that stretched Emma's mind in ways she had missed. To occupy her time and hands, she began helping with small maintenance tasks around the church: fixing loose floorboards, repainting the rectory kitchen, polishing the brass candlesticks that had dulled with age. Each task felt like a small act of atonement, a way to repay Father Thomas for his risk and kindness. Meanwhile, the search for Emma continued, though with diminishing intensity as other priorities demanded law enforcement attention. Wanted posters with her face appeared around town, and occasionally news reports mentioned the ongoing search for the dangerous juvenile escapee. The characterization stung Emma, who had never been violent and whose original crime had been one of ignorance and poor judgment rather than malice. Father Thomas continued his daily routines, conducting services, counseling parishioners, and attending community meetings. No one suspected that the priest was harboring a fugitive in the church attic. His decades of quiet service had earned him the town's implicit trust. Margaret, the retired judge, had been working diligently behind the scenes. 3 weeks after Emma's arrival, she arranged to meet Father Thomas at the church after hours. Emma watched nervously from her window as an elegant older woman with silver hair, pulled into a severe bun, made her way up the church path. Minutes later, Father Thomas called her down to meet his visitor. Margaret Shaw, no relation to Emma, had the commanding presence one would expect from someone who had spent 30 years on the bench. Her piercing blue eyes seemed to evaluate Emma immediately, taking in everything from her posture to her expression. "So," she said after introductions were made, "you're the young lady who's caused such a commotion." Emma shifted uncomfortably, under the scrutiny. "Yes, ma'am. I've reviewed your case file," Margaret continued, removing several folders from her briefcase. "Thomas was right. There are concerning elements here." She spread documents across the rectory table. Court transcripts, police reports, character references from Emma's teachers that had never been presented at trial. "Your public defender filed no motions to suppress, called no expert witnesses, and spent a total of 4 hours preparing your case," Margaret noted, tapping a finger against a billing record. "That's negligence bordering on malpractice." Dunhope stirred in Emma's chest again, stronger this time. "Does that mean I could appeal?" Margaret's expression turned grave. "Potentially, yes. But Emma, you need to understand something crucial. Your escape complicates everything. Had you remained at Willowbrook, we could have filed for a review of your case, possibly secured an early release based on these procedural issues. Now, you're facing additional charges that no judge will simply overlook." Father Thomas placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder as her face fell. "However," Margaret continued, "I believe we have options. The officer injured in the accident, Detective Rodriguez, has recovered fully. I took the liberty of contacting him without revealing your whereabouts," she added quickly as Emma's eyes widened in alarm. "He remembers your case and has expressed some regret about how heavily the charges were pursued against a juvenile passenger." "What does that mean?" Emma asked, barely daring to breathe. "It means he might be willing to make a statement supporting leniency in your case. Combined with evidence of your public defender's inadequate representation and your clean record at Willowbrook prior to your escape, we could potentially negotiate a resolution." Father Thomas leaned forward. "What kind of resolution?" Margaret sighed. "I won't sugarcoat this. Emma will need to turn herself in." As Emma began to protest, she held up a hand. "Let me finish. She'll need to return to custody, but with a strong legal team, which I'll help assemble pro bono, and a strategy in place. We'd aim for a reduced sentence, possibly with transfer to a minimum security facility with better educational opportunities, or even house arrest for the remainder of her term." Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes. After tasting freedom, the thought of returning to any form of incarceration was unbearable. "And if I refuse? If I just run?" Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Then you'll live your life looking over your shoulder. No education, no legitimate employment, no chance to build a real future. Eventually, weeks, months, years from now, you'll be caught. And when that happens, you'll face the maximum penalties with no sympathy from the system." The harsh truth hung in the air between them. Father Thomas broke the silence. "Emma, this isn't a decision you need to make tonight. Take some time to think about it." But as the days passed, the decision loomed larger. Emma alternated between determination to trust Margaret's plan and terror at the thought of surrendering her freedom. She prayed for guidance in the quiet church, something she hadn't done since childhood. One afternoon, a week after Margaret's visit, Emma was dusting the altar when she heard the church door open. Instinctively, she ducked behind a column, peering out cautiously to see who had entered. A woman in her 40s, with tired eyes and hair prematurely streaked with grey, walked slowly down the aisle. Even after 3 years, Emma would have recognized her anywhere. "Mom," she whispered, stepping out from her hiding place. Catherine Shaw stopped mid-step, her hand flying to her mouth. "Emma? Oh my God, Emma!" They collided in the center of the aisle, arms wrapping tightly around each other. Emma breathed in the familiar scent of her mother's drugstore perfume, a fragrance that had haunted her dreams throughout her incarceration. "How did you find me?" Emma asked when they finally separated enough to speak. "I didn't know you were here," Catherine admitted, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I've been driving to every town within 100 miles, visiting churches, shelters, places. I thought you might go. I had to find you before—" Her voice broke. "Before what, Mom? Before you got too far away, or before you were caught by people who wouldn't understand why you ran." They sat in a pew, hands clasped tightly together. Catherine explained how she had been saving money for 3 years for a lawyer to appeal Emma's case, working double shifts at the hospital where she was a nurse's aide. "When I heard you'd escaped, I knew why," she said. "You always hated feeling trapped, even as a little girl. Remember how you used to cry when we put you in your playpen?" Emma managed a small laugh through her tears. "I don't remember that. You were so stubborn. You taught yourself to climb out before you could even walk properly." Father Thomas appeared from the rectory, giving them space but remaining nearby. Catherine's eyes darted to him questioningly. "It's okay, Mom," Emma assured. Father Thomas has been helping me. He and a former judge named Margaret are trying to find a way to fix all this." Catherine nodded gratefully to the priest. "Thank you for protecting my daughter." "She's a remarkable young woman," Father Thomas replied. "She deserves a chance to become the person she's meant to be." The plan was set in motion with careful precision. Margaret arranged for Emma to surrender directly to the district attorney rather than local law enforcement, ensuring that her cooperation would be properly documented and credited. Father Thomas prepared a detailed statement about Emma's time at the church, her remorse, her willingness to work, her intellectual curiosity and growth. Most importantly, Detective Rodriguez, the officer injured in the original accident, agreed to meet with Emma before her surrender. The meeting was arranged at the church, neutral ground where both could speak freely. Rodriguez arrived on a Sunday afternoon. He walked with a slight limp, the only visible reminder of injuries that had nearly claimed his life 3 years earlier. Emma, waiting in the rectory with Father Thomas and Margaret, felt her heart racing as the detective entered. "Miss Shaw," Rodriguez said formally, extending his hand. Emma hesitated before shaking it, guilt washing over her anew. "I'm sorry," she blurted out. "I'm so sorry about what happened to you." The detective's expression softened slightly. "I appreciate that. I've wanted to hear those words for a long time." They sat across from each other at the rectory table, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them until Rodriguez spoke again. "I've read through your case file again," he said, "and I've spoken with Judge Shaw here about some irregularities in how it was handled." Emma listened as he explained how the prosecutor had used her case as a campaign talking point, how the media coverage had created pressure for a harsh sentence, how her age and role as a passenger rather than the driver should have factored more significantly into the judgment. "I was angry for a long time," Rodriguez admitted. "Not just about my injuries, but about losing months of my life to recovery, about the stress on my family. It was easier to direct that anger at you than to accept the randomness of what happened. I understand," Emma said quietly. "I would have been angry too, but anger doesn't serve justice," the detective continued. "And justice should be about more than punishment, especially for young people who make mistakes. I've come to believe that your sentence didn't fit the circumstances of your involvement. He placed a sealed envelope on the table. This is my formal statement supporting a review of your case and recommending alternative sentencing. I can't promise it will sway the court, but I hope it helps. Tears filled Emma's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Rodriguez replied, echoing Father Thomas's teachings without realizing it. It's about choosing to move forward without the weight of resentment. I made that choice for my own healing as much as yours. The following day, Emma prepared for her surrender. She wore clothes donated by church members, a modest blouse, and slacks that made her look older, more responsible than the frightened 14-year-old who had first entered the justice system. Father Thomas held a private prayer service in the sanctuary. Emma's mother attended, along with Margaret and, surprisingly, Detective Rodriguez and his wife. They formed a small circle around Emma, each offering words of encouragement and support. Whatever happens next, Father Thomas told her, remember that your worth isn't determined by your circumstances. You've shown remarkable courage in choosing to face this directly. As they prepared to leave for the district attorney's office, Emma asked for a moment alone in the church. She stood at the altar where she had dusted and polished during her weeks of sanctuary, looking up at the stained glass window depicting Saint Michael. I don't know if I believe in you the way Father Thomas does, she whispered to the empty church. But if you're listening, thank you for guiding me here. Thank you for giving me shelter when I needed it most. The surrender process was clinical and formal. Emma was handcuffed, fingerprinted, and processed back into the system. But unlike her first entry into custody, she wasn't alone or unrepresented. Margaret stood beside her, presenting motions for reconsideration of sentencing and temporary release into her mother's custody pending review. The judge assigned to the initial hearing was skeptical, but impressed by the unusual coalition supporting Emma, a respected former judge, a church leader, and the victim of her original crime, all advocating for a second chance. While he denied immediate release, he did agree to expedite the review of her case and transfer her to a county facility, rather than returning her to Willowbrook immediately. The legal process moved slowly, as such things always do. Emma spent 2 months in county jail, while Margaret's team fought to have her original sentence reconsidered. They presented evidence of ineffective counsel, procedural irregularities, and the disproportionate nature of her punishment compared to similar cases involving juvenile passengers rather than drivers. Father Thomas visited weekly, bringing books and news from the outside world. Emma's mother came even more frequently, her presence a balm during the uncertainty of waiting. Even Detective Rodriguez testified at her hearing, describing his evolving understanding of justice and rehabilitation, particularly for young offenders. 6 months after Emma's surrender, the court reached a decision. Her original sentence was not overturned. The judge was clear that the legal threshold for such action was extremely high, but it was modified significantly. In recognition of her voluntary surrender and the support of the injured officer, Emma was transferred to a community-based juvenile rehabilitation program to serve her remaining time. The program allowed her to live at home with her mother while wearing an electronic monitor. She attended a special high school for at-risk youth, received counseling, and performed community service hours at, fittingly, St. Michael's Church, under Father Thomas's supervision. For the first time in years, Emma could see a future beyond concrete walls. She threw herself into her schoolwork, determined to make up for lost time. Father Thomas helped her apply for college, writing a powerful recommendation letter detailing her growth and resilience during her time at the church. On Emma's 20th birthday, she received 2 life-changing pieces of news. First, her period. of supervised release was officially complete. She was free of the justice system entirely. Second, she had been accepted to the state university with a scholarship for non-traditional students. Emma celebrated quietly at St. Michael's Inn, the same sanctuary where she had hidden as a frightened fugitive 3 years earlier. Father Thomas, her mother, Margaret, and even Detective Rodriguez and his wife gathered for a small dinner in the rectory. "I want to thank all of you," Emma said, looking around the table at the unlikely family she had found. "You saw possibility in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You did the hard work," Father Thomas reminded her. "You made the brave choice to face consequences rather than run from them. And now," Margaret added with a smile, "you have the chance to build the life you want." Emma had already decided what that life would look like. She was majoring in social work, with plans to work with incarcerated youth after graduation. Her experience, the mistakes, the escape, the sanctuary, and the redemption, had shown her how broken the system could be and how much difference a single compassionate presence might make. As twilight fell, Emma excused herself and walked, alone, into the main sanctuary. The stained glass windows glowed with the last light of day, casting colorful patterns across the worn stone floor. The same patterns she had noticed on her first desperate day seeking refuge. She wasn't the same person who had climbed through a maintenance shaft and fled into the night. That girl had been running from justice. Emma now understood she'd been running toward it all along, not the cold, procedural justice of courtrooms and prison cells, but the deeper justice that recognized human dignity and the possibility of redemption. In the quiet church where her journey toward freedom had truly begun, Emma bowed her head and whispered a simple prayer of gratitude. Then she walked out the heavy oak doors, ready at last to step fully into the light.